Hey, everybody. Welcome to the very first episode of the Can I Have a Word podcast. My name is Carl James, and I will be your host. I can't believe I finally got to this place where this is actually happening. This has been an idea in my head for years. Um, it has gone through iterations of can I do it? Should I do it? Aren't there too many people already doing it? And I finally just got out of my own way and decided that this was going to happen and let's do it. So happy to be here. Thank you for joining me. So you're probably wondering, who am I? What's this dude about? So I'll give you a little background. So I'm originally from the Washington, D.C. area. Shout out to the DMV, specifically Prince George's County, also known as PG for those who are in the know. We like to rep hard. Um, that is my hometown. It's where I grew up, but my family is actually from the island of Grenada, not Granada in Spain, but the island of Grenada in the Caribbean. My dad came to the US, I think, late 60s, and my mom came shortly thereafter in the early 70s. They met in DC, bada bing, got together, had some kids, ta da, here I am. I have an older brother who also lives in the DMV with my parents. So they're there, and here I am. But I've lived here in New York for, gosh, probably about over 10 years now, which is wild to say. Um, but I've lived in a bunch of different places. I went to college in North Carolina, and I studied at Duke undergrad. And I actually did a couple of stints overseas when I was studying international health way back in the day. So I did a semester abroad in Uganda, and then I did a year fellowship in Tanzania, where I was, really interested in international public health, focused on how culture impacts the way people think about disease and illness in their community. And I was specifically focused on HIV/AIDS. And so that was the world. And so I was doing the international thing. And it was great and eye opening and all of the things at that time. And then shortly, a couple years thereafter, kind of into my mid 20s, started thinking, I was like, do I still want to be doing this work? Not so sure. So then I took a hard pivot and ended up becoming a performer. So, yep, true that. I actually ended up becoming an actor, and I went to a conservatory, did a little training, came out and was like, okay, let's audition, let's do it. Then the financial crisis happened, 2008. Not a good time to be an actor. So we hightailed it out of New York, went back to DC, and was still trying to perform, still trying to act, and trying to also live. And I noticed that the people who were getting the acting jobs that I really wanted had advanced degrees in acting. And so I decided, well, I should go get an advanced degree. So I ended up going to get an advanced degree in acting, did that, booked a show shortly thereafter, toured with the show. It was great. So that takes us to about 2013. And then I decided, all right, time to now lay down roots in New York and really pursue this acting thing for real, for real. And I started doing it and I was like, this is not easy. Living in New York and trying to make ends meet and make it to auditions, it was a lot. And I'm somebody, as you'll get to know me, I'm somebody who's not necessarily the most patient. So I kind of want what I want when I want it. And I wanted it now. I wanted it then. Um, and so while I was auditioning and trying to make things happen, I was like, well, we got to figure out how to work. So I ended up getting temp jobs, and I ended up getting a temp job in an office in financial services actually. And long story short, I ended up staying there for 10 years, and that was really how my transition from acting to uh the corporate world happened. And so, in terms of what I do now and sort of how I like to think of myself, I think of myself as kind of a cultural advisor slash communications professional. I worked a lot in DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I was really focused on how to create cultural environments within the workplace that felt good and like people could belong, and that you a place where you could thrive and you felt a sense of community. I was one of the co-chairs of our LGBT network, and that was really really kind of impactful for me in terms of helping me understand what I'm looking for when I think about community and what I think about safe spaces. So that's the kind of world that I sort of tried to help create, and that's kind of still the work that I do now. I'm also a huge champion of mental health. You will probably hear me invoke my therapist or therapists, including the ones I've had in the past, more than once. I think mental health is really important. I think as a Black man in America, I think it's important to acknowledge the importance of mental health. And I don't think there are enough of us who sort of openly talk about it and celebrate it in the way that we should. I know sometimes there's still this sense of like having to not let people know that when we're not okay, or not letting people know that we have to rely on somebody to kind of help us get through tough times. But I try to be as much of a champion of that as possible, to encourage people to actually talk about it. So you'll have to indulge me when I sort of go on my mental health tangents, but that's just a part of who I am. So, in terms of what this podcast is and what I hope it will ultimately be, one of the things that I care about most is the language that we use toward each other. I think communication is really important. How we talk to people matters. I think we've kind of entered a place where we try to devalue or minimize the impact that words can have on each other. Um, I don't need to tell you, there's a lot going on in the world. And I think a lot of language that we use is, quite frankly, under attack. And so, one of the things that I want to do with this podcast in particular is unpack language and really begin to understand how that language shapes the stories that we tell about ourselves and the stories that we tell about others, and ultimately how does it shape the people that we ultimately become or who we want to become in the future. So that's the kind of overarching goal, but there's a story kind of within the story there in terms of how I got from where I started to where you see me now. So in terms of where this all probably started from in terms of, communication and using my voice, I think it honestly goes all the way back to elementary school. And it started with a particular teacher who I really had, I think she really had an, a meaningful impact on my life. Her name was Mrs. Oakes. And Mrs. Oakes was I laughed just thinking about her because she was a great teacher, but she was kind of a quirky lady. She she taught me in fourth grade. She was my fourth grade teacher, and I know she loved science. Science was her thing, and she was really good at trying to get kids excited about the possibilities of what science could do and the joy of learning all things science. And I wouldn't necessarily say I was super into science, but because of Mrs. Oakes's influence, I think I started to get into it. One of the things Mrs. Oakes did very early on was she wanted to encourage kids to join this, young astronauts club that she was creating. And she wanted to use students to help promote it. And so she wanted me to do these kind of announcements. Think back to, grade school morning announcements. Somebody comes on and welcomes you to the day, tells you what's for lunch, you say the Pledge of Allegiance, that whole thing. And then, there were some announcements about clubs or activities or whatever is going on in the school that day. So Mrs. Oakes asked me to do some of the announcements for this Young Astronauts Club. And I didn't think anything of it. I was like, oh, I'm just going to get up there and read some stuff. Kind of what I did. And I couldn't have called it voiceover because I didn't know that that was what you would call that. But I really enjoyed reading the announcements and kind of playing different characters that she, would design to kind of promote these activities. And Mrs. Oakes also then got a group of us to act in these very low budget school videos. I mean, lower than low budget. Like they were not good. But, it was the 90s. What are you going to do? So I was a kid. We were playing these roles. We were just being kind of goofy, but it was fun. And that was really the first time when I started to understand, like, oh, like I can use my voice and I can use my body to help tell stories. I was like, this is interesting. At the same time, I was also at 9 years old very aware that some of the things that I was doing made me different than some of the other kids. What do I mean by that? I mean, I was being asked to do things that other people weren't being asked to do. And I was sort of distinguishing myself in ways that were unique. And some of that was because of my voice, because people like how I spoke. And I was very aware of that. And you have to imagine, I'm an 80s, 90s kid. It was a very different time. Kids today probably say some of the same things, unfortunately. But, when you are in a, let's say, predominantly Black environment and you start to excel academically, or people see you doing things that are not, quote unquote, the norm, kids say stuff. And I started to think like, am I not like other Black kids? Am I doing things that make me somehow, I don't know, less Black? Which is weird to think about when you're 9, but those were things that kind of crossed my mind. Now, I thought those things, it didn't make me do anything different, but I was very aware of how I was being perceived, both because spoke well, but also how other kids may have viewed that in not the best light. So it's a weird kind of thing to think about all these years later, but I think those were very important moments in my kind of development, because this idea of my voice and what does it sound like and how do people perceive it, that's where that idea really started to, I don't know, come into view for me. And so I I say all of that to say, cut to adult Carl. Adult Carl is working in corporate America. We are, years into our career. We're in spaces where sometimes I'm being asked to maybe lead a meeting or give a talk or intro a speaker. And I think, I was doing that well. Talking is not something that is difficult for me, but people often felt very inclined to come up to me after I had given a talk or an intro or something, and would comment on how well I spoke. And I was like, okay, that's fine. I get it. The interesting thing about that is the choice of words that people would use. And in particular, there's one word that was often used that started to give me a bit of pause. And that word is articulate. Now, there are some people who already know where this is going, and some people are like, yeah, what's wrong with that? So here's the deal. I understand when people use that word that there is good intent behind it. Essentially, you're trying to acknowledge that the way someone is speaking has moved you in a particular way, or you feel good about what they did, or you want to acknowledge how well they constructed the argument. But articulate is a very particular word. And I'm delving into this because this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this particular podcast, is that language is powerful. Language has context and nuance, and language also has history. And for most of us aren't linguists. Most of us aren't, you know, that well versed in history to understand the history of how certain words get used or manipulated. But articulate has a very specific context in that, I'm going to back up. We're going to define it first. The actual definition, and I actually looked it up so nobody would try to come for me or throw tomatoes. But the actual definition of the word articulate, if you're using it as an adjective, means having or showing the ability to speak fluently and coherently. it sounds fairly basic. And if you're using it as a verb to articulate, it means express an idea fluently and coherently. So, in essence, if you think about the definition, in essence, all you're really saying is if someone is articulate, that all you're saying is that they speak and pronounce words well. You're not saying that it was a well constructed argument. You're not saying that it moved you, it was impactful, it was deep. You're just saying, like, oh, you spoke and I understood you. That made sense. Is that a compliment? I'm curious what people thought I was going to do. Did you think I would not prepare? Did you expect it to sound worse? Did you expect the subject and verb to not agree most of the time? Where am I going with that? That word has a historical legacy, and I will say maybe more specific to Black people than any other group. Um, there is a history of Black people, in particular, being viewed as not being sophisticated, not having command of the English language, not being poised enough, not being something enough to convey themselves with conviction, with authority, in the way that others in the majority culture were considered. And I think that the legacy around that idea is perpetuated through the use of the word articulate. Because here's the problem. When, as I've acknowledged, you're not really paying much of a compliment to someone when you use that word. So that's one, you're not saying that much. But two, when people use it, they're often expressing some sort of surprise, like, huh, I didn't expect you, person, to deliver that message in that way. And so there's this element of surprise that people almost have when they give you that quote unquote compliment. And so then the question becomes, why are you surprised that I spoke that way? Again, what did you expect? The other point, and maybe the most important point, is that I've never met an articulate white person in my life. Quite literally. Whenever I've heard that word used, it has almost always been used exclusively for people of color, specifically Black people. And again, when you are receiving it, I understand full well that it is used with good intent. But the problem is the impact of that word on me does not feel good. And I would venture to say that for most people for whom that word is used, and particularly if you identify as Black, it doesn't feel good because what you're doing is essentially calling into question whether or not you expected me to sound as good as I sound. That's the power of language. And again, if you don't have that context or that background, that's going to be lost on you. And so imagine if you're me in your office or in your, whatever your corporate space is, your meeting room, and you've given your remarks and someone comes up to you and they say, "Great job, Carl. You are so articulate." What are you supposed to do? Given what I've just told you, you know all these things, you have all of these ideas are running around in your head, but you're in the moment. Somebody is trying to pay you a compliment. What do most of us do? "Oh, thank you so much. Really appreciate that." And you smile and you keep it moving. But if you're anything like me, in your head, all these things are rolling around. Now, in corporate America, something like that would often be referred to as a quote unquote microaggression. I have my own issue with the term microaggression. Issue might be strong. I often feel that microaggression, the term microaggression becomes this sort of catch-all for incidents that are indirect or subtle or unintentionally discriminatory or have some tinge of discrimination or othering associated with it. That is true. I often feel that it doesn't go far enough to explain what just happened. And so it can be lumped into this category of people feeling overly sensitive or overreacting. I actually don't think it's an overreaction. If you have had to deal with these things for your entire life, people questioning whether or not you belong in a space, people questioning whether you know how to communicate well, people questioning in some in some instances your existence period, but finding the need to always validate and to confirm and to reassure people that yes you belong, yes you deserve to be in that space. You've been doing this your entire life. That gets exhausting. And I think a lot of people who've had to go through that um struggle with how to respond. Do I really want to have this, race 101 talk, or do I really want to do this form of education right now? I'm trying to go to lunch. I don't have the time to break this down for you. And so, more often than not, when it happened to me, I just smiled through it because there really isn't a safe way to do that in a work setting. But I struggled with this idea that, there needs to be an education around how we talk to each other and the way in which words land on people and why people feel the way that they feel about them. Because everyone has a story. Everyone has a narrative around language, around words. We just don't know it. We just don't know what that is. We know what our individual story is, but we don't know what person X's story is across the way. So, where am I going with this? That's why I wanted to do this, because I was tired of feeling frustrated and somewhat inept when it came to dealing with these incidents when they happened and not really knowing how to have conversations with people in an honest, direct way about it. I could talk to my friends after it happened, or I would go to lunch, or I would go for a walk and or go in a conference room and be like, do you know what so and so said to me? But how helpful is that if the moment has passed, the person who did it doesn't know that they potentially did anything wrong? They don't know that it impacted me the way that it did. And we just miss an opportunity for learning. So I wanted to be really intentional about finding a way to help people, but also help myself, help me navigate the power of language, navigate communication. I am by no means an expert, Lord knows. I think a lot of what I've learned has come through real life examples and a lot of the work that I've done in therapy, because I've had a lot of incidents where, things will happen, disagreements, arguments, whatever, with people that I genuinely care about, family, friends, etc. And I've got all of these great tools that I think I've collected over the years about how to communicate effectively and sharing space and creating opportunities for dialogue. But a lot of other people don't necessarily have those same tools. And so when it comes time to have those conversations, you're just kind of left, with this void. I want to talk about everything. Other people are like not interested in that or feel like I'm coming on too strong or asking for too much. And then people shut down and then the conversation doesn't happen. Or if it does happen, somebody gets very defensive and things blow up and nothing is really solved for. So I want to get to a place where we can really unpack language and really learn and see how it shows up in people's lives. Because I think the way we really learn about each other and the way we learn about each other and learn about the experiences that we may not have had is through other people's stories. And so that's what I want to do here. And so my plan for this season is to invite friends, colleagues, and a couple of folks that I've actually, don't know that well, but we've connected. I want to invite those folks here to share a word that has some meaning for them, either because it was used a lot towards them, for them, about them, or maybe something, an idea that was invoked in their household, and that word reminds them of that. A word that has some level of importance to you, positive, negative, or otherwise. And they're going to talk about what that word means to them, how they define it, and how it has shaped the person that they are, and ultimately how it will or how it continues to shape the person that they hope to become. Now, it doesn't have to be super heavy. I know today, because of this word, this one is one that has sat with me for a very long time. So it was a little heavy. I get it. But it doesn't have to be. I think language can do a lot of things for us. And so, I think we'll go through a journey here. I think there's going to be some happier moments. I think there's going to be some moments where we get a little deep with it. But I think ultimately the goal is to come out on the other side and feel like, you know what, I learned about this person. I got a window into a world that I wouldn't otherwise have experienced or explored, save for hearing this person's story. And I have an understanding of the nuances of this particular word or how this word shows up for this person. So again, I'm a storyteller. I like hearing people's stories. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from each other if we really take the time to listen. So I hope you'll join me for what should be a really interesting, engaging season of conversations with folks who are a part of my life, a part of my world. And I think if you are open to the possibilities of what, language can do, I think you'll learn a thing or two and think about how you can navigate conversations better in the future because of the way in which we think, a way in which you've maybe taken something from this particular podcast. For better or for worse, language shapes us all. And so why not try to make it work for the better? So I'm going to leave it there for now. I hope you will join me for future episodes. I'm really excited. I'm a little nervous, but nervous in a good way. But I think we're going to have a good time this season. So again, my name is Carl James. I'll be your host. This has been Can I Have a Word? Thanks, everybody.